We'll kick off this morning with Bill Spindle, Senior Global Correspondent at Cipher News, to get hot off the press. What has gone on at CERAWEEK? What's the big takeaways? It seemed everybody passed through town there this week and dropped a little bit of information and a bit of outlook. From this distance, my kind of takeaway is that it looked like a little victory dance for oil and gas with the slaying of energy transition. And Bill, as one of the world's greatest journalists on energy transition and renewables, did that what it feel like up close and personal? Give us your takeaways.
Yeah, on the surface, absolutely. It was a return and a triumphant return of oil, gas, even coal. But I'll tell you, it was also a really interesting to be here. I was the last time I was here was 2016, so 9 years, right, almost a decade, and it really has been a profound change. And you really saw, after the victory dance, everybody dove into a huge discussion of some just massive structural shifts that they see going on in energy markets, and that those are just a really big deal, and in fact kind of defy the whole narrative of, well, it's just as simple as we're back to the future. Demand growth was all the discussion, but it was all about electricity, all about power, all about data centers, manufacturing, often as in China, manufacturing, but even in the US, manufacturing of, electric vehicles, of semiconductors, batteries, that sort of thing.
Or as we've heard all week about as well, steel and aluminium. That seems to be the new. It was fentanyl a few weeks ago, and God knows what, and migrants, those dirty things. But it seems now the whole anchor of the tariff universe is to get steel and aluminium factories back to the U.S.
And that was another big structural shift. It was really an even more focus on energy security, in the context of trade as a kind of weapon of economic security, and how that's changing everything. And so in the end, everybody settled on sort of it's not a transition anymore. It's a giant energy addition, which pleased everybody. But in some ways, it's it's be careful what you ask for, because some of the implications of that were really big. A lot of people were talking about a faster decline of oil consumption in China, for example, as China, as the EVs and for security reasons, their new economy gets going. And for security reasons, they, are even more determined to get off imported energy. So then, lots of LNG growth talk. That was probably the belle of the ball completely. But again, always in competition everywhere around the world with solar plus batteries, which, in many places at many times is the cheapest form of electricity. So, so a story of huge growth, but also really intense competition in all sorts of new ways.
Just looking at that, the sort of Iran piece and then all of the sort of geopolitical threads from it, what I'm trying to understand from the Trump administration and from the US point of view is how big a deal this is for them, how much political capital the Trump administration's willing, or not only political capital, but maybe more than that, on this issue when there's so many other things flooding the zone, fighting with Canada, now huge tensions with Europe on not only the Ukraine war, but also sanctions or tariffs on Iran, tariffs on Europe, tariffs everywhere by the looks of it from April 2nd. But where do you think they are on this point? It was raised by the U.S. Secretary of Energy at CERAWEEK, but I wouldn't say it was the center pillar of his speech.
I mean, the Iran question.
The Iranian issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think Trump, he's a deal maker. He'd love to make a deal. That's what he likes to do. He likes the idea that would bring a whole new flood of oil onto the market and perhaps, push prices down, which he also promised. So I think that's kind of what's behind it. I don't know how serious they're really getting in terms of the kind of deal that I think the Iranians, obviously the landscape has changed dramatically for Iran over the last year. They're not in anywhere near as good a position they were before. However, I think their reaction to that is going to be, let's retrench, take the time, rebuild up these networks, and they've been very good at it. They take the long view, so I'm not sure they're going to jump into any deal super quick. And meanwhile, Trump's Middle East, envoy is busy in negotiating a Ukraine deal.
And on that point, the Ukraine issue, that's obviously another big geopolitical piece of the puzzle. We've had Putin's response overnight to the 30-day ceasefire proposal by the Americans that the Ukrainians have signed on to. They have a more muted response. Your thoughts as to where the U.S. is in that game? They've obviously, for much of the last 2 weeks, it's looked very much like the U.S. had sort of switched sides of the football team and was clearly on a Moscow supporting position. Is that a bedded-in posture in the U.S., do you think, or is indeed Trump trying to find a neutral position to negotiate here? Where do you think this goes now that Putin hasn't given that categoric, yes, I support a 30-day ceasefire?
Yeah, I
Puts
think
Trump
again.
in a bit of a bind.
Yeah, well, I think again he wants a deal. He's very eager for a deal. I'm not sure as much as that he's switched sides, although you can say that he certainly
Well,
there's a
certainly
lot
the
to
Europeans think
like.
so.
There's a lot he seems to like about Putin and the way Putin views the world. But I think mostly what he'd like to see is a deal. And, I think he's going to find that's pretty tough squeezing Vladimir Putin on this. If he went into it thinking we'll just freeze the situation as it is and call it quits, and gee, isn't that a great deal for Putin? That is not a great deal for Putin in his mind, and he's going to push for a lot more. So, I think that means Putin, I think, feels he's thrown the ball back into Ukraine's court, and now we'll see how eager Trump is to squeeze the Ukrainians again for the kind of concessions he'd need for Putin to, eventually come around to a deal. But for now, I think Putin's determined to first push the Ukrainians out of Russian territory, which without U.S. help for the Ukrainians will eventually happen, and probably not all that long from now. But it won't happen tomorrow or the next day.
Bill, I wanted to take advantage of having you on to get your expertise on India. Of course, you spent many years there as the Wall Street Journal bureau chief and South Asia coverage. And we had one of India's leading energy experts on, a senior energy advisor to the Modi government earlier this week, and basically saying that the fracture in the Western geopolitical alliance is a good thing. They're actually I think the words he used, we should be celebrating it. They're kind of into a multipolar world. I'm wondering, from your point of view, that includes, very willing to import cheap Russian oil during the sanction period, but to continue to do so because they also want Russia to have it not to become overly dependent on China, etc. I just wonder if you give us your worldview from India, how they might be looking at all of this going on, particularly the fracture in Europe, US, and the US is coming for them as well in terms of tariffs.
Yeah, I think India's always felt it does better in a world that's less bipolar, where they're having to strictly, try to navigate between two massive powers. One of them right on their border, constantly threatening them in many ways. So I think they would like a world that's a little more spread out. They feel that gives them a lot more maneuvering room. But I think also what's happening, and you were really seeing that here at CERAWeek as well, is that they were really, you could see the industry really trying to, I go to a lot of these events as you guys do. And for the first time, I really could see people trying to get their heads around realizing that these are really, really profound shifts going on in the world, both in the energy markets, but also geopolitically. I mean, we're not talking about just little sort of, incremental marginal moves here and there in the Middle East or in, transatlantic relations. We're talking about the unraveling of the entire, transatlantic relationship with the US. And what does that mean with China's stance towards Taiwan? What does that mean for Japan, for Korea? and flows of energy, particularly oil, through those tradable things. There's a lot of talk about, it's not peak oil, it's peak oil trading, and that is going to only decline from here as everybody tries to sort of secure their own thing. So I think that's what India is reacting
Well, it's
to.
as you said in your earlier point, the idea of the weaponization of everything, right? Even now, this last few days, the weaponization of Moet Chandon champagne, or
Yeah, and
the
I think
weaponization of oil, or even the
there
dollar. Everything's on the table.
and there the profound shift is it's not, before security concerns were often like, well, we've got to have some sort of big military presence and the rules-based order will make sure that in the case of a war, the US will come in and, in the event of some really cataclysmic, event. But now it's sort of like, no, it's economic security and it's day to day, hour to hour. How are you going to protect yourself? And you
And,
can't
and
rely on anybody else in a transactional world. You can only rely on your own, wits, resources, and maneuverability.
and your own guns, as Europe are kind of realizing. But just on that point, Bill, the chaos of this moment that's obviously been delivered primarily by the arrival of Donald Trump into this second administration, an industry that was cheerleading his election and funding it with lots of money, i.e., Houston, the epicenter of the oil and gas industry in the United States, if not the world. Are they still cheering? Are they still delighted? Are they welcoming all this chaos that their candidate has brought to their table?
On the surface, yes. In closed door rooms, I think they're, trying to figure out how do you deal with this situation? And it's, I think, very, very challenging. A lot of them, I think, really are like, you know what, let's just try to stay the course as best we can. We're not going to, for example, drill baby drill. We're not going to just blow up. We're not going to, instantly spend tens and tens of billions of dollars developing Arctic, oil reserves or deep water again. And that's really what's killing the economy or the stock market here, let's say, at the moment, is just this. It's the uncertainty and the realization that it's not going to be a momentary uncertainty. It's going to be uncertainty that's going to extend well beyond just sort of narrow little tariff negotiations out, into really profound geopolitical and economic shifts in the world that are going to, permanently change the way energy markets work.
There was a moment early in the Trump administration where there was a certain belief that Trump's North Star was the S&P 500, was the Dow Jones index, and that once that got a kick, he would back off. But clearly, that doesn't appear to be the case at the moment.
There's
Let's
a
go
lot of
to the
agendas
serve.
in Washington, a lot of different
Sorry.
agendas. There's a
Yeah.
lot
All
of
right.
different agendas, and it's not clear which one is gonna win out. And the just put your head down and drive forward as fast as you can is that agenda is winning right now. We'll see how long that lasts.
Bill, final word with you on that same question, and particularly incorporating into it what does appear that the U.S. economy, the word recession has been bandied about again. It hasn't been around for a while. I thought that was like with the dinosaurs. You didn't have recessions anymore. You just printed more money. What does it look like from there? Obviously, serious layoffs of federal government employees and other tech, Silicon Valley, a lot of layoffs there, banks. What's the macro picture look like for the U.S. economy, incorporating all of this Trump tariffs?
Yeah, a lot of turmoil and a lot of uncertainty. And I think that's people are starting to realize that this uncertainty again is not going to be, quickly dispelled, that it's likely to go on. And these tariffs are
Without
not.
pushback domestically?
Well, I don't think you're going to get a lot of pushback until we get a little closer, at least another 6 months as we get closer to the midterm elections. They're gonna, we've got a huge tax fight to come. They've got to come up with $4.5 trillion of leeway just to extend Trump's tax cuts, and they'd like to do even more than that. Which means you're going to have a lot of this budget cutting still going on in this really chaotic fashion. So I think people are just realizing that this, what they thought might be a, a brief period of turmoil is really going to extend much longer than that, and that the Trump
In the
administration
middle of all of
much
that, Bill,
plan.
you have from our industry point of view, you have the EPA, or the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, which of course was a big giveaway to the energy industry of subsidies and tax
Right.
relief and all sorts of things. How is that surviving this Trump tsunami?
Well, I think that will be a topic of discussion when industry officials meet with Trump. There's a huge struggle in Washington going on between the factions in the government that basically just seem to want to break the government, and worry about fixing it later, and want this huge tax cut to go through, and thus are looking for all sorts of areas anywhere, and maybe even, areas that hurt Republicans within that IRA are pretty plump, cuts they could be making. So you've got this huge fight with them, and then the typical sort of new administration comes in. We are going to help our friends and our faves. That faction's there too. Who will win out in this? I don't know. I think there's a lot of confidence here at this conference that many of the IRA subsidies that go to red states and industry and like energy industry type stuff will survive, and all the consumer stuff will get cut. But when you ask people, are you sure that they definitely don't say yes? They
Yeah,
look.
it's from this distance, it's like where will the opposition voices come from? And you can see them, green shoots of them popping up, remote town
I think
halls
surface
with
they're working
convers.
hard. They're working
Huh?
hard. A lot of these companies, these big companies, have made big bets on carbon capture, on
Yeah,
hydrogen, on many factories, even EV factories, battery factories, all in red states. So they're pushing hard beneath the surface, but there's a lot. Nobody's sure that that's going to work, because there does seem to
yeah.
be a thrust in Washington that is really just break the government, save as much money as we possibly can, and then do the tax cuts and move on from there. So we'll see which side of that emerges